Hello, everyone. Uh, Today is the Korea's most popular traditional public holiday, so I have to offer these online classes. But I hope that you guys are enjoying the first Korean public holiday in South Korea, traditional public holiday. And you may not find some restaurants or a supermarket during the holiday seasons. So I hope that you secure the food for survival. And I also that I want that you can experience some of the some scenes of Korean tradition during this break. Anyway, since week two we are exploring the cases, theories of Korean politics or East Asian politics with the from a comparative perspective, and I think this week's topic is also very important because the theories explaining Korea's economic miracle or Japanese economic miracle or East Asian miracle, they pinpoint the most significant actor during the process of economic development, which is public bureaucracy, state bureaucracy. At the same time, unlike the other democratic countries, right? Democratic countries. In these countries, actually, politicians actually represent the public, and Congress. Congress most one of the most important actor in public policy making. But interestingly, East Asian miracle during the process of East Asian miracle, in both Korea and Japan, Singapore, and other fast followers like China and Vietnam, state bureaucracy is the most important actor. So we will explore who were the state bureaucrats and who were politicians and what's the background of them and how they played or exercised a crucial power during the policy making process. So first of all, I will begin with the bureaucratic theory from a comparative perspective, and we will explore this kind of question: Who become a bureaucrat? What's their life? What's their backgrounds? How do they exercise power? And in contrast, who become a politicians? What's their life and how do they exercise power? And what would be the new relationship between the state bureaucracy and politicians in contemporary era? We are not living in a development period anymore. I mean, East Asia, South Korea, Japan are more exposed to global economy. So it's quite different from the development period, right? Then what is the new relationship between the state bureaucracy and politicians? That will be the target of today's lecture. First, let me bring these, you know, uh, Joel Auerbach and Robert Putnam's comparative book on public bureaucracy. Uh, so, so according to the Western democracies, according to the scholars in Western democracies, they have a clear images of the politicians and bureaucrats. So according to this Western democratic countries people, politicians are usually involved in policy making process and they are very crucial actors, and also politicians, elected politicians, congressmen, for example, represent and help to articulate the broad and diffused interest of the unorganized individuals. That means citizens. They represent citizens, voters, right? And of course, individual voters may have some different interest in policymaking process, but they tend to represent this kind of broad goals and interest of the unorganized people. So politicians, congressmen, is an intermediary organization linking citizens and state. So congressmen are very crucial policy-making actors. Also, through the various activities like campaigning or fundraising or community service, These politicians bring energy to policy making and push forward some policies which is deemed to the right and value. That means, for example, half and half, for example, liberals, conservative, right? Usually we think that conservatives are more closer to national security and then business friendly, and liberals advocate welfare and some policies for minority groups, right? So if these groups actually competed with each other and try to push forward their agendas in Congress, actually the policy making process will be very, very dynamic and energetic, right? So competition is basically not that bad. It can be very good. On the other hand, there's a clear distinction from the Westerners' perspective. Bureaucrats usually involved in policy implementation process, not decision-making process. So from Western democracy's perspective, politicians actually decide policies, and bureaucrats' role is just the implementation. That's typical image of the bureaucrats. And bureaucrats usually technocrats who provide the politicians with necessary expertise. They have worked in the same field, same policy area for several years, right? But politicians are elected every 4 years, so they may not have enough expertise on particular problems. The bureaucrats actually provide the politicians with necessary expertise and knowledge on a particular policy area, like national defense, diplomacy, welfare, economic development. Bureaucrats have more expertise. And usually, typical image about the bureaucrat is this. Bureaucrats seek to avoid conflicts and depend on technical and incremental solutions as a way of problem solving. But politicians can be more dramatic because they have to be elected in every 4 years. So more stronger agenda may gain more popular support for them, right? So these are kind of theoretical and common images of politicians and bureaucrats from Western democracies. So let's put this Westerners' perspective in your mind, and then we can explore what happened in Japan or South Korea and East Asia. Let's begin with the Japanese case first. The reason why we study Japan first is that Westerners or developmental state theorists actually studied Japanese case first and theorized Japanese economic miracle. So when they studied Japanese economic miracle, right? Well, they thought initially, like United States or Western democracies, politicians actually play a crucial role in deciding something, and bureaucracy just to implement what the politicians decide. But what they found is that, Japanese case is somewhat different. They play a crucial role in public policy making as well, and they dominate the information and control the flow of information and finance. So bureaucrats' role was not simple implementer of public policy. They are very, very important policy actors. So they decided to study and theorize the power of bureaucracy in the politics of East Asia. So in case of Japan, we can explore some of the key characteristics of the state bureaucracy. According to in week 2, right, we studied a strong state argument, right? State lead economic development, right? Then how state led economic growth? First, bureaucracy actually were dominated in decision-making process. In particular, some powerful economic institutions, such as a Ministry of Finance or Ministry of International Trade or Industry. They play a crucial role and dominated decision-making process inside the government. And this trend was particularly true in Japanese case, in particular in this period, the 1950s and 60s. And during this period, Ministry of Finance bureaucrats dominated almost all areas of the policymaking process. Bureaucrats and often took initiative and drafted many bills. According to this T.J. Penpel, about 90% of the government bill were initiated and drafted by the bureaucrat, not politicians, right? So this is quite different from what Western democratic theorists expected. And the legislative process, in terms of the relationship with the politicians, bureaucrats actually dominated information and drafted many government bills, but they provided some consultation to politicians. Anyway, in the end, politicians will pass the law, right? So bureaucrats also need some politicians' assistance. To that purpose, bureaucrats actually provided some consultations to politicians in Japan. Bureaucrats also has some technical expertise. They could control the flow of information from overseas, right? And also they are very strong in formulating industrial and economic policies and foreign policies. Politicians in particular has very limited information and expertise about industries and economic policies and foreign policies. These are kind of a key national affairs, right? Key policy areas. And these key policy areas were dominated by state bureaucracy. That's what happened in Japan. If you see this, then you may wonder what was the kind of a background of the bureaucrats? Who become bureaucrats in Japan, right? Let's take a look at the historical background. Remember, I mentioned that the samurai class, the traditional soldiers, during the pre-modern society, this samurai class. Have you heard about the samurai class? Samurai class were actually administrative clerk to, their feudal boss. Feudal leaders. They were soldiers, but this samurai class was the only class who learned Confucianism in Japan. So later, after the modernization, this samurai class become bureaucrats, because they were the only the class who could read the Chinese characters. So they entered the Todai Tokyo University and learned, and studied, and later on become the bureaucrats. At the same time, they were trained soldiers, but at the same time, they have honor code of samurai, high moral value. So from the modern government's perspective, these people are well educated, and these people have a code of conduct and honors, and they were loyal. They were loyal servant to their boss. So they are best people to be bureaucrats. So in modern period, samurai class were regarded as a very responsible people, highly responsible people because of the code of conduct. And rest of people were regarded as a stupid people. They are not educated. They are not ready to be a modern person, right? So this kind of image has been constructed during the modernization period. So if you look at their social economic backgrounds, more than 50% of the samurai class, their fathers, has university degrees. More than 50% of Japanese bureaucrats has managerial positions in private organizations. They occupy the high ranked positions in private businesses. More than 30% of the bureaucrats from the modernized and urbanized Tokyo area. Right? They were exposed to rapidly changing world. So if you look at the background of bureaucrats, they are very homogeneous, very elite people, and a well-educated family, a wealthier family, and exposed to the global changes. So they are homogeneous and elite background. They become the bureaucrats in Japan. And if you look at their Japanese bureaucrats' educational backgrounds, they are most educated and most talented people in Japan. More than 85% of the Japanese bureaucrats actually graduate from Tokyo University. We call it Todai in Chinese character. Tokyo University, Todai, and Kyoto University. So Japan is an island country, right? If you divide the country like east and west, eastern people is closer to Korea, and Kyoto is the key city in western Japanese area. The regional rival, Kanto, eastern area, and Tokyo University also is the best university in this region. These two are Kyoto University and Tokyo University are cross-regional rival, like Harvard and Stanford, for example, right? But more than 85% of the bureaucrats actually graduate from Tokyo University and Kyoto University, and they are best universities in Japan, and that means best of the best actually enter the government sector. And 60.3% of the bureau directors, the high rank officials, high rank positions in government, or Todai, Tokyo University graduate. In particular, Tokyo University School of Law department were dominated. And interestingly, if you look at this one, right? If you look at this one, Ministry of Finance. So this ministry is finance-related organizations, right? So many people may expect that, so most of the bureaucrats may come from economics department, right? Or industry majors, for example, finance, banking. But interestingly, 88% graduate from Tokyo University Law School. So this is not just a study of legal, it's broadly speaking social science, social studies in Japanese context. So they become the bureaucrats, right? Then how do you become the bureaucrat in Japan? Usually there are two types of exam. So if you pass this lower degree exam is a bit easier, and you go to the lower rank government offices. And if you take upper degree exam, fast track exam, you become the mid-level manager level bureaucrat once you've passed the exam. So this is Tokyo University and Todai and Kyoto University. Both prestigious universities, always high-ranked universities in university rankings, and they produced most of the government bureaucrats in Japanese history. So they obviously, this kind of a Japan Tokyo University graduate contribute to the rapid economic growth in Japan. But once heyday passed in Japan, people, general public as well as politicians, started to recognize the domination of Todai graduate in their governments. So in 1992, the Japanese Prime Minister Miyazawa actually warned that, hey, Todai graduate, there are too many Todai graduate, Tokyo University graduate in government. They shouldn't be more than 50% of the central bureaucrats. They warned like this. In 1991, Ministry of Finance appointed 24 new bureaucrats, and 92% of them, about 22 people, were Tokyo University graduate. There are other good universities like Keio University or Juo University, Waseda University. They are private universities, and they already know, the students in these universities already know they are not gonna be successful in government offices. They don't take the government civil servant exam. Usually, Keio University graduate and Waseda Graduate University, which are top private universities in Japan, they goes to private sector, private business. So promised Miyazawa's comments like this indicate that there are very too many Tokyo University graduate in the Ministry of Central Ministry, right? This actually discourage diverse opinion, and maybe if you come from the same university and same department, you may construct some hierarchical structure inside the government, right? So it may be not healthy. Index is not. It doesn't represent some healthier governmental organization in many respects. But anyway, once you pass the fast track exam, usually you may get some basic training. We call it apprenticeship. Once you pass the exam, you get trained to be a bureaucrat, and once you successfully pass the training program, you will be placed on some positions inside the government, right? So training process will take more than 5 years, up to 10 years, and you don't work in the same ministry forever. Rotation system is quite popular. You work in the one ministry, and at about 1 or 2 years later, you move to other desk, other ministry, or other department inside the same ministry. One day, if you pass the higher civil servant exam, right, you may have a chance to study abroad. So most of the bureaucrats in Japan, they had a chance to study in Ivy League universities, public policy schools, and etc. etc. They have a chance to work in study in elite universities. So former prime minister who were assassinated, Abe Shinzo, right? So this guy also studied at the University of Southern California, where I graduate. So this is very common. But since you don't work in the same ministry for 10 years or 20 years, bureaucrats initially considered as a general, bureaucrats. They have a general managerial skills. They don't have specific technical skills. Promotion, how they are promoted. Your lifetime goal. What is your lifetime goal? For professors, you may begin with the lecturer position, and you may promote it as an assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. Bureaucrats also have a similar structure. Once you pass the exam, you may serve as a general manager level bureaucrat for several years, and after like 6, 7, or 8 years, you may be a division director, and you may promote it to bureau directors, and then your final goal will be vice minister. This is a bureaucratic job. If you minister position is a political position. You should be a politician. You should pass the election, right? So for general bureaucrats, being a vice minister would be realistic career objective for you. So vice minister is also political positions, but still this position is a target of many general bureaucrats. What would be the salary level? Their salary increase is based on seniorities. So first several years you may get little salary, but if you have worked in the same ministry more than 5 or 6, 7, 10 years, you may get paid more. It's not a performance-based salary. Okay, seniority is the most important criteria. Of course, this is changing after IMF, economic crisis, but still, government actually provide the salary based on their seniority. And bureaucrats has another benefits. If you serve as a civil servant, you may get a chance to get the public housing services. So there are some benefits to being a bureaucrat, but at the same time, bureaucrat salary is a bit lower than private counterpart. So that's the some unpleasant part for civil servants. At the same time, national pension. Usually, pension for civil servants is quite stable and strong. So that's why people choose to be a bureaucrat in both Japan and Korea too. This has been one of the most pulling factor, induce people to the government sector jobs. Right, so you can see these are character of the Japanese bureaucrats. Retirement. When do they retire? Usually, 60 is the retirement age now, but people usually retired at 42 to 43, and then it's too early, right? Too young. What would you do if you retire at 52 or 53, right? So, but government bureaucrat structure is like this. Higher positions is scarce and scarce, right? So if they recruit a 100 person at the bottom of the government structure, at the manager level, number will be reduced to 50, and then top position only 10 people will survive. Then what happened to 40 people here, right? So these guys here, 42 or 43 or 44, they are pushed from the government. Hey, you we don't have enough position, so you may study abroad here, or you may actually dispatch to foreign countries, embassies, or you retire. You choose to retire. Your chair is not available. Why don't you retire early? But for Japanese central bureaucrats, they have another chance. They are loyal, best people. They worked really hard and they accumulated some expertise, right? So they could easily find their second careers. The first choice was local governments. Hey, from local government perspective, it was good. We successfully recruited, induced this former bureaucrat in the central ministries. He may have a still connection to the central government. We may lobby to central government to secure finance from the central government, right? So their work expertise, very smart people, and they still have connections. So former bureaucrats at the central ministries were welcomed by the local government offices. And second kind of job was public enterprises. Unlike the U.S., state-owned enterprises are quite popular form of the businesses in East Asia. In Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, China, Korea, all East Asian countries have a lot of public enterprises. So they could find easily the second job in public enterprises too. If you fail to find that this kind of job in local governments or public enterprises, you may choose the private companies too. So, why private companies welcome former ex-bureaucrats? Same reason to local government's offices. These guys worked in the central government for several years. For example, I'm a construction company. I'm the owner of the construction companies. There are a lot of things, government-related businesses. You have to get approval, permission, right? You have to get the investigated from the Ministry of Construction. So if you have ex-bureaucrats who worked for Ministry of Construction for like 20 years or 25 years, 30 years, he may know very well how things going on inside the Ministry of Construction. So if you successfully secure these guys as a board of director members or vice president or of your company, it's a kind of a great advantage. You may have an edge, right? So we call it this phenomena, right? Top bureaucrats retire early and get a job in local government, public enterprises, and private sector businesses. We call it amakudari. Literally, amakudari means descent from heaven. They worked for heaven and then went down to their local governments, public enterprises, and private sector. Would you please take a look at this video clip so you may actually learn about the amakudari. Still popular. You know, they are welcome. These people are welcome because they are highly intelligent people, a high moral value, right? Moral principles. They are diligent, right? They work hard. They are loyal to the government. Nationalist. National interest first over private interest. Who refuse to hire these kind of people, right? In particular, if we take the example of economic bureaucrats, so economic bureaucrats mostly graduate from Tokyo University Department of Faculty of Law, right? They have this kind of backgrounds. They usually pass the high-level civil servant exam and become the fast-track bureaucrats. From at the 20s, for example, they become manager. Right? They don't get a PhD. PhD is doctoral degrees are not welcomed by the government because the Japanese bureaucrats believe that if you get a PhD in particular area, that makes you stubborn, right? So you need to be flexible to handle the various types of national agendas. And these people, economic bureaucrats, are very effective. Even there were intra-governmental organizational competition. For example, in Japan, Ministry of Finance, Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of International Trade and Industry compete with each other over similar governmental affairs. So often, if there is this kind of a competition between the similar bureaucracies, you may experience fierce competition, fierce fight, conflicts. But interestingly, in Japan, this kind of competition instead created a greater efficiency. Because I think this is because they has this kind of quality. They were loyal to the state. National interest comes first, right? So they collaborated when final decision stage actually comes. So this is what happened in Japanese inside the bureaucracy. To conclude this kind of a Japanese bureaucratic perspective, so basically bureaucrats dominated 1950s, 60s, but overall still very powerful political entities in Japan. But one of the notable changes these days is that there's a growing trend. Politicians also gaining power. They started to armed with the expert knowledge, and they hired some policy staff members, and they become stronger and stronger and powerful. They could check the bureaucrat with the budget and personnel power. But regardless of these growing politicians in Japan, still bureaucrats are very powerful. In particular, MITI and MOF bureaucrats are very, very powerful actors in Japan. They are still key players. And also, we may notice some kind of challenges and changes in public bureaucracy in 1990s and 2000s, in particular when neoliberalism dominate East Asian countries. But change in the role of bureaucracy will be discussed in several weeks. Okay, so these are kind of characteristics of the Japanese public bureaucracy. Then what's next? We have to think about the Korean case. But before we talk about the Korea's case, let's take a look at some statistics. The percentage of the government employees, public servants, total population. In U.S., France, Germany, Britain, only 6 to 9% government employees. In Japan, it's much smaller. That means this size of the government exercise greater power. Very surprisingly, right? Government employees percent of employed population. So at least 15 to 20% of the civil servants work for public sector. In Japan, only 9%. Right? This is a surprising number. Regardless of this small number, Japanese bureaucrats exercise the greater power and very, very influential in public policy making. Percentage of the national level bureaucrats who see themselves, not the politicians, as solving nation's general policy problems. So bureaucrats believe that they are the problem solver in their particular country. Right? 80% of the Japanese bureaucrats believe that they are expertise and they are problem solvers. Only 20% in Britain believe that they are experts and they are actually doing something good for their country. In Germany, only 16% of the bureaucrats believe that they are doing greater job and they are solving the government's problem and national problems. So Japanese bureaucrats are very effective workers. At the same time, they have a greater self-efficacy. Right? So because of this tradition, their former, ancestors were samurai class. They originate from samurai class. So if something happens, if something goes wrong, many Japanese bureaucrats commit suicide. They have a moral value, higher values. Okay, so I hope that you understand the basics about the Japanese bureaucrats. And Ministry of Finance is often considered as the most powerful ministry in Japan. Look at the Ministry of Finance structure. So here, Ministry of Finance is the one of the biggest organization in Japanese governments, right? But under this Ministry of Finance, control, there is a Tokyo Stock Exchange, Bank of Japan, Fair Trade Commission, National Finance Commission, Overseas Economic Cooperation Fund, and Japan Development Bank, Export-Import Bank of Japan. These key organizations are under the control of, Ministry of Finance, MOF. So literally, MOF is the biggest and most powerful organization in Japan. But at the same time, MITI was the cross government rival. But this, in terms of size, MITI was quite small, but powerful, right? And MOF is related to, their job is related to the big industrial corporations, other bureaucratic agencies, and political parties too. But anyway, MOF exercised a great power over many finance-related, economic policy-related areas. Okay? MOF is composed of operated based on the three key functions. The first was mercantilism. This Ministry of Finance issued a direct foreign investment capital and blocked the foreign goods to make use of taxing power, insurance regulatory power. And this MOF actually spend law on the foreign goods, encouraged national savings. It was the National Ministry of Finance. Also, MOF is dealing with the cartelization. They control the cartelization through via Japan's Fair Trade Commission, and they set up the limited monopoly. They try to regulate the rise of monopoly, right? Tool of power and a device to generate economic growth. So they created some competitive environment. This MOF actually led businesses to compete with each other to generate a greater efficiency. Of course, the Ministry of Finance also involved in overseas foreign aid. This organization actually engaged with the disbursement of the aid made on the understanding that the recipient nation make contributions to election campaign funds of the selected Japanese politicians. Anyway, so this dealing with money actually make that agency very powerful, right? So I sketched the formation of the Japanese bureaucrats and the Japanese bureaucratic institutions briefly, and then in the second part video, we'll actually talk about the bureaucracy in South Korea. Okay, I will meet you in next video.